Previously on Dark Water Podcast.
Police say they are only beginning their investigation into the two decomposing bodies discovered across the street from each other this week.
She says the attacker cut Megan's hair, but her daughter couldn't see who it was.
Abby Lynn Patterson was last seen leaving her home here on East 9th Street a year ago today.
Tonight, a special edition of our program examines Robeson County, a place where poverty, distrust, and violence have become a public issue.
When you've got a fragmented county this way, everybody's pulling against everybody else.
What's up?
Hey, how's it going?
Good, man. How you doing?
Doing well. All right, so for the folks that are just dropping in, I'm Bret, and
What's up, man? I'm Nick.
Nick's here with us. This is Dark Water Podcast, if you're joining us for the first time. We've been researching and doing this podcast since maybe fall 2017 about the murders and disappearances of several women in Lumberton, North Carolina. Rhonda Jones, Kristen Bennett, Megan Oxendine, and Abby Patterson, all within spring and summer of 2017. So all along you guys have been sending us questions, and we're finally going to take some of them and just talk about what you've asked so far. And I think Nick's going to kind of be our DJ for this episode and lead us through what he thinks would be most interesting to talk about first.
Yeah, and just want to thank everyone for just tuning in and just all the questions that were submitted and all the just tips and stuff that we just received over now our third year doing this. It's pretty incredible. All right, so our first question comes from Irving, Texas.
All right.
This is from Anonymous. It says, "Hey Bret, hey Nick. Just want to say I'm really enjoying the podcast from Irving, Texas. I did want to ask you guys a question. You know, I really was kind of surprised at the end when you guys said the rape kits were held by police for a year. That's really interesting, and I hope in the future we can get some answers to that question. Second thing, I really enjoy hearing about Dr. G, and I wanted to get your input about when you guys started the podcast, and did he give you guys any tips or pointers? Big fan of Up and Vanished, and yeah, so that's basically the gist of that question. If there's any advice that kind of helped our investigation as well.
So a big thing for us, I think, and you can jump in here, Nick, was Dr. G talked to us a lot about the geographic profiling. And it kind of mathematically confirmed something a lot of people probably suspected, that whoever committed these crimes has an affinity for East Lumberton. They work there, know someone there, frequent the area for some reason. So we kind of confirmed that through Dr. G. And other than that, we really didn't get a hold of any specific case files. We put in a lot of FOIA requests, but they were never returned, not denied, but never returned. So he would have been able to help us a lot in that realm if we had actual case files, but we've only had medical examiner, autopsy, toxicology, and then pretty much what the media knows and what we found out through interviews. So he helped us a lot with that, and just I think how LPD would be working with the FBI to conduct this investigation and why they were called in the first place. Other than that, he just kind of reminded us that, you know, this is serial murder, regardless of the motive. That seemed. Yeah. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, and he's just been a big champion of us ever since we started, and he's just introduced us to so many people that have just helped us along the way. So he's been an incredible help to us. So we're very appreciative of Dr. Godwin, and he lives like an hour away from both of us. So it's even better that, you know, we have someone on our home turf as well.
Yeah, it was really cool when we got to visit him in Fayetteville. Super nice dude. Helped us out a lot. We just emailed him out of the blue and never expected a return really on that, but it's been awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So our second question is from a resident of Robeson County. We got this via email some time ago. It says, "Hey y'all, I love that y'all are shedding light on Lumberton and the possible serial killer. I grew up in Topsail Island, not too far from Robeson County, and my husband went to UNC Pembroke, which is the local college. I was wondering if y'all looked into the possibility that it's related to the Seven Bridges killer in Rocky Mount. Rocky Mount is about 2 hours away north off 95. A man was arrested and charged with murder in one of the deaths, and there are 10 suspected victims. But according to a news article, There's not enough evidence to charge him with the other murders. Interesting enough, he had been held in Lumberton Correctional Facility since 2016. The connections I see really are the background demographics of the women, and it just sounds like similar cases that are happening in Rocky Mount as well. So essentially, they just want to know if they're related, or if we, think they're related by one central suspect, as she seems to think it might be.
Yeah, thanks, Allison. Awesome question. And I just want to say that case is fascinating in general, the Rocky Mount serial killer case, or some people call it Edgecombe County serial killer or Seven Bridges Road killer. But Antoine Pittman, the guy that police at least believe committed these crimes, or at least they say he did, he's currently in Raleigh Central Prison, not far from where I live, actually. So I've debated at times trying to write him maybe for some sort of future creative endeavor to go into that case, but we're not really sure for now. But as far as them being connected, I think they're only connected in the ways in which they occurred. I don't think it's actually a similar person that committed those crimes. That's always the possibility, but I'd say it's the least likely. But in Rocky Mount, the situation was those girls were literally on the wrong side of the tracks. They were on the black side of town. And just like in Lumberton, they were written off until enough were found that they actually had to call in to get help with that situation there. So there's some debate about the person incarcerated, if they really committed those crimes. It's hard to say. There's a little bit of evidence that could make you think either direction. I would really recommend, if you are interested in that story, to hit up I know this sounds weird, but it's in GQ, but it's a GQ story from years back called Lost Girls of Rocky Mount. But you really should hit that up if you're interested in that story. I think it's just as captivating as what we've been covering in Lumberton, and maybe we'll get a chance to speak on it more in the future. But I think they're similar as far as victimology goes. Women that were written off.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think it's definitely, the victimology is very similar, and also like just the proximity to 95 is also the same. So I feel like a lot of, rural areas off major interstates, they all kind of have this similar kind of problem where there's drugs, prostitution, and just like, other means of getting by. Yeah, definitely. Rocky Mount, like Lumberton, was crime ridden. I think Justin, who does our music, actually came from Rocky Mount or grew up there. So he can attest to that. Justin? Yeah. I don't know if he's here right now. I don't think he is. All right, so moving on, we have another North Carolina resident. They're from Raleigh. This is from Laurel. Says, I'm a member of the Lumbee tribe. My parents are originally from Pembroke, but right now we live in the Raleigh area. I'm a dedicated Dark Water podcast listener. Thank you for listening. I was wondering if you all would be speaking more of the opioid epidemic and unsolved crimes going on in Robeson County. Recently, my 27-year-old cousin was found dead inside her friend's home. After hearing talk around town, she was one of the 4 within a few days to be found dead. Some say it was an overdose, some say it was an unknown drug from a crooked dealer. We have involved the police and still remain with unanswered questions. We are still mourning, grieving, and questioning, but once we lay her to rest, I want to tell her story. Even if it's just a story of the hardship of this process, and raise awareness of the drug epidemic in Robeson County and how much pain these choices cause family, leaving children behind, and the impact on the community. I hope to hear from you all. Thank you for your question, Laurel. Yeah, thanks to Laurel, and in general, thanks to anyone in the Lumbee tribe that's been writing to us and sharing their experience, because obviously as 2 white dudes, we don't really have a frame of reference for that, and we're learning as we go. So we appreciate the perspective. And the story of Lumbee tribe in general is crazy. They've been fighting for federal recognition since like the 1880s, I believe. And just really unique cultural situation going on in Robeson County. But going back to Laurel's question, we obviously wrote her soon after she sent that in, because that's super tragic, clearly. And that's the first thing we wanted to address. So we did with her in an email. But as far as the opioid epidemic, we really haven't talked about that specifically, maybe just grazed over it as we've been covering Lumberton material. We know that it's going on there as it is in all of North Carolina, and I assume it's pretty bad based on the socioeconomic status of most folks there. So it hasn't directly intersected
with our story other than just substance abuse issues at large in those areas of North Carolina. But obviously, this goes without saying, something still needs to be done more, not just for this case, but all those that fall in that category. We know it was cocaine for the cases we were looking at, but, all addiction should be handled better systemically.
Yeah, I completely agree. And a lot of the places that are rural and, smaller places like that, they're one of the last places to actually get, progressive type, addiction type treatment
exactly.
facilities that are.
Yeah, speaking of which, if the federal government would actually recognize the Lumbee tribe, they would get more resources for those issues. So it's kind of ironic that, you see this problem in society, something like that would address it, but in some cases you actually have other tribes speaking out against them getting that recognition. So interesting dynamic there, one I'm still learning about for sure. Yeah, for sure.
All right, speaking of, we have another Lumbee tribal member that sent in the question. She says, I'm a Lumbee tribal member that's been listening to your podcast lately. I was curious if the murders in Rocky Mount were similar. This is kind of similar to the question we had earlier. I remember in the past community members going to rehab centers in Rocky Mount. I was just curious if the victims had drug-related issues. That's essentially this question that we got earlier.
Yeah, they were all sex workers with addiction issues for sure. But I do want to point out against kind of popular opinion on sex workers, a lot of them did keep regular contact with their family despite leading that lifestyle, which is why many were reported missing eventually. But yeah, very similar in that situation. And another thing that was crazy about this email was the person that sent it in said they actually work near Abby Patterson's mom, and they work at the Robeson County Board of Elections. So Abby Patterson, if you're just tuning in and you've never listened to the podcast, after 3 women were found dead in April through June in Lumberton, right around the corner, Abby Patterson disappeared. It was September 5th, 2017, and she vanished in a brown Buick. Lumberton police actually knows where she was dropped off. They just refused to say, and they refused to say who drove her or if they're a person of interest. But a lot of people speculate about her being directly connected to the other women we've covered on the podcast. And Nick and I went driving through that neighborhood several times now. It's not just that it's in the same neighborhood. These women were found and or disappeared literally right around the corner from one another. So
yeah, literally you can walk around the entire neighborhood within probably 10 minutes, if that.
Yeah. So it's really hard to see those items not being connected. And we've reached out to Abby's mom several times. Maybe eventually in the future she will want to speak with us. But we've always got this as a platform if she does.
Yeah, we're just trying to be just the big, supporters of everyone that, is just trying to be heard. And we're just trying to be another voice for the people that, don't have a voice at this point. So, all right. So our next question is from Dr. Melinda Maynard Lowry, and this is kind of a special email because just of her notoriety. She's a published author. But basically,
go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say she's a member of the Lumbee tribe and a professor at UNC, history professor and director for the Center of the Study of the American South. So, yeah.
All right. So she writes in, "Hey y'all, been listening to the podcast. Thanks for the new episode. I thought you might like to know of an event tonight, which was an event in November. This happened in November, but it was pretty much a big conversation about Julian Pierce, the big activist, the Lumbee Indian activist from that. There's a big event happened in the 80s that revolved around him. So long story short, there was a big event regarding that.
Yeah, so essentially a lot of people think he was killed in a political assassination. He was a member of the Lumbee tribe running for public office there. And he was shot dead in his home, and it was chalked up to a domestic situation. A lot of people think otherwise. A lot of people think he was sort of linking local law enforcement there to the drug trade. And there's an entire story about all this that we covered, including a hostage situation at the newspaper. And that was, I think, in episode 6 now. It was kind of about the history of Robeson County. So, again, that's something we barely scratched the surface of. There's a lot of conspiracy thought and just a really interesting story in general. So there's a lot out there on that. You should look it up, Julian Pierce, or you can listen to that older episode. And if you want to continue with the email, Nick. Sure.
Yeah. And then she tells us about the book that she's written. It's called The Lumbee Indians, An American Struggle. You can find that on Amazon. And then she asks, is there any evidence that the woman named S is working with the Lumberton Police or Sheriff's Department as an informant? And do we know if the families are being represented by anybody?
Well, it's kind of a timely question because recently I was able to talk to Kristen Bennett's mom. Kristen was the girl that was found wrapped in the gray blanket in the TV cabinet in the blue home across from Rhonda in the trash can, same day, April 18th when this started. But she has actually been told by law enforcement recently that a claim that was made earlier on has been debunked. A lot of people speculated that these girls were killed by men hired by a female drug dealer, the woman called S, for stealing drugs from her. This is something a detective said to Rhonda Jones's mom shortly after they were found, but we know now from speaking with Kristen's mom that she's been told that was completely debunked. The person said to be involved took a polygraph and passed. We know that's not always a guarantee, but in this case, apparently that trail has gone cold. And right now, there's actually one person of interest they still want to speak with and interview. And I don't know how that's going because obviously they only give the family so much information as well. But Kristen's mom did want people just to know that she was a loving person, not be framed as a victim. And she's been notoriously private, her mother. So we appreciate her sharing what she could about that. Yeah.
For sure. And then another email that she sent through just after some just small talk about just, her book and stuff like that. She says, hi again. I ran across this link below, which we'll share the link after this episode. I ran across this link below and wanted to share. You may be familiar with the perspectives already. I know you're learning about the community as you go along. You began the podcast and have reiterated in several episodes the very sad state of poverty, inequality, and injustice that exist in the community. It may be worth reminding your listeners that the struggles of the Lumbee people and the Robeson County residents are what receive the most attention in the mainstream media, and the information that the outsiders will most have ready access to, and there's a reason for that. Few journalists or casual observers have the time or the patience to get to know the texture of the community, and are happy to simply focus on our problems without much digging into why these problems exist, often leaving people to conclude that there's other way for us to be, that we're inherently deviant or violent, and that there's no point in addressing the structural or daily inequalities that face us. The status of knowledge about indigenous people, even in our own home state, is so deplorable that is an easy conclusion to reach when journalists don't thoroughly investigate their own biases and blind spots. And she lists she gives the article at the end of that.
Yeah, so that was helpful for us as people kind of easing into that community and getting to know it. Yeah, because obviously we're not legitimate journalists with degrees, but people investigating, trying to tell a story. So good perspective to have.
Yeah, and just having that kind of perspective to kind of, take it delicately, like don't judge. And that's kind of been our whole kind of MO throughout this entire thing is, we're not here to judge. We're here to kind of give voices or kind of, help people that aren't being heard. Yeah. Essentially.
Very true. I think we've got a lot more in common than we realize sometimes, especially in light of what's going on recently. We've realized with COVID-19, a lot of people fall to the bottom of the totem pole in society quickly. So somebody else one day could be us the next,
Yeah, absolutely. And it's more evident in like Lumberton and Robeson County area, just like a lot of places like that, especially when like natural disasters happen, like COVID-19 or hurricanes, which they're notoriously, prevalent in that area. All right, so now we're going to go to our Instagram questions. We've gotten a handful of them over the past couple months. So, first question is there going to be a season 2?
You want to take that one?
So, it's a great question. We don't know. We want to, but we're kind of at a standstill. Like everything's grown cold, and no one's really talking to us, and no one's really, pushing the case further than we are at this point. It feels like, aside from the families, obviously, but other than that, unless there's a big break in the case, I don't see us pushing any further for this particular case. For another season.
Yeah, they're interesting updates. I think we could bring them in one-off episodes if something really relevant happens, but I agree with Nick. It is pretty cold right now. I think a safe answer would be Nick and I probably want to work creatively together more, be it on this case or something else in the future. Could be other true crime or something outside of that. But I agree. I think we're very much at a standstill for now.
Yeah, and we're still working on the documentary. It's just everything's just a real slow burn with this type of stuff. Yeah. So especially cold cases where it's just cold everywhere you go.
And it's odd because though it's a cold case, after 3 years, it's still fresh enough that a lot of people don't really enjoy talking about it or don't want to come forward. So the few interviews we've been getting, we had to fight really hard for and really earn people's trust. So I think this whole endeavor is much more of a slow burn than we realized it would be when we started. But naive of us to think we would jump in and solve some murders immediately. Exactly. It's been a crazy ride so far, but it's been incredible for sure. All right, so moving on to our second question from Instagram is what happened to Abby and how she related to the other women? So we actually covered that a little earlier in detail about her disappearance and the proximity to the other women. And, though there's been kind of an effort to separate her as far as not being a sex worker like the other women, she was still an addict. So I think there's a chance they shared a connection through that aspect of life as well as just how closely they lived together. And I do think there was a high probability the same person that preyed on Rhonda, Kristen, Megan, and Cynthia Jacobs, who we talked about in later episodes, maybe did something with Abby as well. Yeah,
I completely agree. Because what I always kind of think internally is I think it's just the same. Maybe it's the same drug dealer or same kind of central drug.
Yeah,
like regional drug, not really cartel, but
I think it could certainly be a serial predator that's tied to that world somehow. Yeah,
absolutely.
They did drain 2 ponds looking for her this past summer, but that didn't turn up anything. So still a complete mystery. Again, police know where she was dropped off. They know who she was with, but that information they haven't released, and they haven't been willing to say publicly that she is linked to the other women.
Okay. So the next question is, can the family members sue over the delay in the rape kits and the fingernail scrapings?
I don't think they can sue because it's the case with Hanya Aguilar, the young girl who was kidnapped, raped, and killed. That sparked the legislation that made it a 45-day mandatory period. So before that, I don't think there really was any strong legislation. So unfortunately, I don't think they would have any ground to stand on there. And as horrible as it is, I guess if more people know about these cases, the more push there will be. Because frankly, I think even 45 days is kind of ridiculous. As far as the fingernail scrapings go, all we know is that those and other evidence, it's all been submitted to the NC Crime Lab. We don't know what results that's yielded yet, but they're there.
All right. So is the woman called S still in jail? Is there a way to contact her or any of her associates?
We tried to get some background checks on all of them. I think some are incarcerated. They have some intense rap sheets. It came up blank as far as the background check, which sometimes is an indication that those records have been sealed temporarily by the FBI, as I'm sure they were looking into them eventually. We know that from the audio tape we heard with family meetings. But I do want to reiterate, just to be clear, it's been now debunked by law enforcement, the theory that Rhonda and Kristen stole drugs from the woman called S and that she had a series of men take them out. From what we understand, the latest information is that that's all been debunked, and law enforcement actually has one more person of interest that they would like to interview and speak with about the crimes. Again, that's been a recent update from the FBI to the mom of Kristen Bennett. And by the way, thanks for all the folks that have been dropping in, saying hey. And if you have any questions, we'll try to get to those as we close things out in just a little bit. But we appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thank you. And happy Easter. All right. Did y'all mention, this is our last Instagram question before we talk to our special guest. Did y'all mention someone in law enforcement was related to a drug addict or a sex worker?
So I racked my brain on that question a lot. I can't remember exactly, but not that I recall in particular. We've discussed the fact that in the past, law enforcement in Lumberton has shared family members with people that are on the wrong side of the law, so to speak, but not a particular drug addict or sex worker that I'm aware of. So if you want to clarify later, send us a message. We'll try to answer that better. But yeah, we'll move on to that special guest, Maurice Godwin. You might know him from Up and Vanished. He was kind enough to talk to us. We discussed him a little bit earlier at the beginning of this live episode.
So, Brett, do you want to read his question?
Yeah, so...
Or your question to
Yeah,
him?
definitely. So these are some questions we've had for Dr. Godwin from folks. First one, the state crime lab has been testing the fingernail clippings and other evidence since April of last year. Is it normal for results to take this long? Is it likely they wouldn't be announcing where any potential evidence is pointing them in private? Do you think the delay is simply from negligence due to the sexual assault kit backlog, or perhaps indicative of a greater cover-up? Because that's something a lot of people have asked about throughout all this. Is there a deeper cover-up going on with law enforcement for these cases? Are they profiting some way off the death of these women? Or is it really just negligence? So this is what he had to say.
I think that since North Carolina rape backup kits is thousands behind, and this is a cold case, I think that it's just they just backed up their cold cases, and it's just not a priority to them.
All right. Anything to add, Nick, or are we moving on to number two?
Moving on.
It has been revealed that the FBI was upset with several moves from the Lumberton Police Department, including not sharing information provided from the families, which I was told directly by the Jones family. They learned that LPD was not passing on info to the FBI, and some FBI agents were actually upset about that in a meeting. But in addition, they were also upset about the fact that Lumberton Police Department decided to destroy a gray blanket at the medical examiner's office that Kristen was wrapped in. So we asked if it was typical for local police departments to be guarded when interacting with the FBI, especially after asking them for help. Is this an issue of lack of experience or purposely evading a proper investigation?
Typically, the local investigation agency is fully cooperative with the FBI since they asked them to come in to help. So I'm not sure about them withholding information from the FBI. That doesn't seem right.
Yeah, and I know the human mind likes to quickly go to conspiracy and cover up, but I do think more and more there's a chance that this is all negligence and human error, especially given the type of victims they were working with.
Yeah, I agree. And I think there's just so much crime prevalent that they kind of prioritize what is more important. And unfortunately, people that are, considered the, women of the night or sex workers or drug addicts, they're typically the they're not the first to be helped, if that's...
Definitely. And if we want to truly be honest about it, the way law enforcement's going in that area, they just got back rights to receive federal money through a drug forfeiture program because they were so corrupt for so long. So their number one goal is making money off people with an addiction, not helping them, penalizing them. Yeah. So that's how I see it more and more. But moving on, unless you have something to add.
Nope.
All right.
So the next question is, I'll read this one for you. It is, the FBI recently disclosed to the family member of a particular victim that are still looking at one person for these crimes, despite previous theories.
Oh, very quickly, did we do number 3?
No.
Okay. Word.
It was not answered.
Okay, got you covered. No big deal. Sorry to cut you off. We're doing it live, like Bill O'Reilly.
We're doing it live,
There gotta
guys.
be mistakes. Yeah. Carry on.
And if you like this format, please let us know, because it's kind of cool.
And also fun while we're all at home.
Yeah. It is cool. Yeah, for sure. And hope everyone's being safe. All right. So the question is, Brett, you can read if you want.
All right, I'll hop in. The FBI recently disclosed to the family member of a particular victim, and again, that's Kristen Bennett that we discussed earlier, that they are still looking at one person for these crimes, despite previous theories. What type of person do you think they are? Do you think it's likely they have already been interviewed, or at least on law enforcement's radar?
Yes, I'm not sure about being interviewed, but I'm sure that the killer is known to the police, and they just don't have enough evidence at this time to charge him.
And that makes sense. I mean, we know a lot of the times these people, they've either committed suicide, left the area, they have been interviewed, like you said, but there's not enough evidence. So really there's this mystery person left hanging out there now. So no clue. We've learned so much, but we're kind of back at square one if it really is this mystery guy.
Yeah, it kind of throws a wrench in every theory that we've ever heard until now.
I feel like we've learned not a lot about the cases, but just more about all the different institutional crisis situations that we've witnessed along the way. So
yeah, and it's not just prevalent in Eastern North Carolina. It's prevalent throughout lots of rural places in the United States. It's kind of crazy about the many similarities, kind of like like Jennings, Louisiana. There's
exactly
a fresh case just like that. That didn't happen that long ago, and it's just like the cases that we're hearing now. So it's very crazy to kind of see the commonalities amongst everything throughout different parts of the
exactly
country.
Another good example, Long Island serial killer case has been going on since the 90s, same types of victims, and you look at people like Grim Sleeper and Samuel Little.
All right, so here's our last question from Dr. Godwin. Do you think law enforcement knows what has happened or has been covering it up? Or is this just a sequence of just, lack of effort and dropping the ball multiple times and just incompetence, really, police incompetence? So this is what he had to say.
I just don't think. I think the Lumberton police has botched this investigation to a point that they think they know who the killer is, but don't have enough physical evidence to charge the person. I think that's exactly what all these cases amount to.
And I completely agree. After initially when we first started working on these cases, like my mind was made up. It's like it has to be a serial killer or like something like a simple answer like that. But like as we gotten further into it and it's just gotten more complex, and then there's just so many different theories, I just feel like there's just a series of different mistakes that were made through crucial people throughout this entire investigation.
I know. I think,
and not just this one, but many others that are just like it.
I think by the time the FBI was called in, so much had been botched already, it seems. I mean, even if the gray blanket was a mistake, that's a horrendous mistake. I have no background in law enforcement, but I wouldn't destroy a blanket that someone was wrapped in.
The gray blanket thing was a couple episodes. I think it was like the third episode or something like that. But essentially, law enforcement threw away a blanket that one of the bodies were wrapped inside a TV cabinet, and they just didn't see it as crucial evidence.
That was Kristen.
And just lots of little things like that throughout this entire investigation, which, you know, who knows how many other investigations are just like it or even worse.
Yeah,
so.
I mean, Lumberton's so full of situations that just, you know, melt your mind when you look at it and try to figure it out. There's this situation, there's past serial murders we've looked at in Lumberton. There's some really odd grave desecrations that we've never even covered on the podcast, one of which they called in the FBI because they thought what they were looking at was so strange with these bodies just left out in the open. And that's really how I feel with this place in general. You're looking at something, you know it's strange, you can't put your finger on it as far as what exactly is going on. I mean, it's just a crazy place. The truth being stranger than fiction there for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I want to say thank you to everybody for sending in your questions. It was just, and thanks for just joining us throughout this duration of the podcast and the documentary so far. And it's been a fun ride so far. But we have one more episode, right, Bret?
Yeah, definitely. And I agree. You know, we never expected this many people to listen. So thank you so much. And I hope that it raises awareness in some way and at least applies more pressure to these cases or ones like them in the future. And as far as the last episode goes, we know that we've covered a lot of complex conspiracy theory around the case and delved into a lot of very minute detail. So for the last episode, it's going to be a very clear-cut timeline of just the crimes and important surrounding events, factual stuff that we've confirmed since we've started the podcast. So we're going to be presenting that in narrative form and making it as much of a just interesting story when you look at just the bare facts laid out of what's happened since the morning of April 18th, 2017 up to now. And if you want to find out more and you're just tuning in, we've got all the past episodes available wherever you want to listen. And we all hope you're doing well at home, staying safe.
Yeah. And thank you for joining us. And again, if you guys like us doing these kind of live formats, just let us know.
Definitely.
It's fun, and thanks for participating.
Exactly. And speaking of participating, we're on Facebook and Instagram, Darkwater Podcast. You can always leave us a voicemail at 919-307-9331, or you can hit us up at darkwaterpod@gmail.com. So, speak to us if you'd like to before we close out the season, if there's anything you want to add or ask. Anything left, Nick? We have one message from Dr. Godwin, and that's all. Awesome. I have. And did we miss any questions along the way?
Let's
see quickly.
Is there anyone?
Looks like we've covered them all. Yeah. Awesome.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Let us know how you like this, and we'll be speaking with you soon for that last episode.